My name is Amanda Brightbaugh, and I'm a photography professor here at SFA. And this is the copy stand room. So this is a room where students can photograph their artwork, either two-dimensional or three-dimensional artwork, using lighting, a camera, backdrops, everything that stays set up for students to use in this room. The room is 105, and you can talk to probably any professor or myself to get access to this room to be able to photograph your artwork. So first I'm going to show you the piece of equipment called the copy stand, which is for photographing two-dimensional work. So this is it. This is the copy stand. It includes two lights. This stand, which is basically a tripod that holds your camera parallel with this surface where you can put your artwork. And that surface is actually magnetic. And I took the camera down because I wanted to show you guys a couple things on the settings. So the first thing to do when you get in here is to just turn this power strip on, which will turn on both of the lights and the camera. Because this camera is actually plugged in rather than using a battery. This camera lives here. It stays in the copy stand room. It's available for you to use to photograph your work. And so it's plugged in rather than relying on a battery that we would have to expect students to charge up every time. So once you've turned on the power strip, the camera you'll be able to turn the camera on because the battery will have power. The power button is just right up here, so turn it on. I would typically use this in manual mode, and it has been preset to a shutter speed and aperture that work for this lighting situation, and an ISO. So it's preset in manual mode at an ISO of 400, which is kind of a moderate, pretty high quality ISO. A 50th of a second, which is slow enough that it needs to be on a tripod, but not so slow that vibration is going to be a problem, and an aperture of 4.2, which doesn't give you a lot of depth of field. That's pretty shallow depth of field, but typically you're photographing flat things, you're photographing two-dimensional artwork, so you don't need a lot of depth of field. So that's where it's set if you were to shoot in manual mode, and that's where it should stay. The white balance has also been preset so that it matches these fluorescent lamps that are here. So that has all been set ahead of time. If you are totally clueless about cameras and you feel more comfortable using this on auto, you can certainly do that, and then just turn it back to manual when you're finished. So that is perfectly okay. I do recommend bringing your own SD card if you have one. So often there will be an SD card in this camera, but I'm not going to promise it because other people come in here and they use it, and they might just take it home and forget about it. If you bring your own SD card, you can photograph your work, take it home, and have time to edit that sort of at your leisure. So here's where the SD card would go. If you are bringing in an SD card that has been used in another camera, it is smart to reformat that card. So I'm going to show you how to do that. When you do that, you lose all the images on the card, right? So you have to make sure that they're backed up somewhere else first. Backed up on your computer, backed up on another drive, but make sure that you have a copy of those images before you format the card. Okay, so to format a memory card, and this is on basically any camera, not only this model, you would go to a menu, and then you would find the little wrench icon over on the side, and say OK, and it's often the very top option here, so format memory card, and it says all the images will be deleted, OK, and you say yes, and then it formats that memory card. So typically the camera just stays on the copy stand. If you were to take it down, to take the card out or anything like that, it's easy to put back up. There is just a screw mount on the bottom of basically every camera that is used for tripods, and this screws into it. Okay, you would want to make sure that that cord goes up over the stand so that that doesn't get in your way. You can see the power button from the front, even if you are vertically challenged, as I am myself. You can pretty easily turn it on, even when it's all the way up at the top, like it is now up at the top of the stand. If you're photographing smaller artwork, you can bring it down. When you're photographing larger artwork, of course, you need to get it up there so that you can see everything. So now the screen on this will actually pop out so that you can see what you're doing from a standing position down here, rather than having to get up on a chair, which is nice. So that's how you do that. If you wanted to move the copy stand up and down, there's just a screw back there. And you unscrew a little bit and then you can slide that whole arm down, or slide it up if you've got larger artwork. The way that these lights are set up, they are the same light, so they are equal brightness, and they should be set up at the same distance from the subject and at the same angle. So you want these two lights to be set up in exactly the same way, or as close to it as possible. And they will light your artwork evenly. What you want when you're photographing artwork is soft, diffused lighting that is even over the whole surface. So especially for two-dimensional work, you don't want any shadows, right? So the way that you do that usually is this light is kind of aimed at this corner and this light is aimed at this corner. And if you were to measure the light, all around the whole subject, it would be even. So that's the goal. I mentioned before this is magnetic, and these little bars are magnets. So if you need to sort of hold down the edges, you can do that. Okay, and then I have found it useful to switch to the film mode on this camera, because that makes it live view, so I can see my composition, see whether my print is centered in the frame, or if I've got a lot of space, or something like that. In general, this is a zoom lens, so it's an 18 to 70 millimeter lens. 50 is what they call normal on these cameras. So 50 is going to be as little distortion as possible. In this case, 50 is zoomed in a little too much with a print this big. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, but not more than I have to. And then I'm going to sort of recenter. It is best to use autofocus in this situation because it's hard for you to get up there and focus through the viewfinder. So even if you're tall, I think that would be uncomfortable. So it's useful to use the autofocus, and it is sort of preset on autofocus. Generally, you are going to want to make an image where there's no background showing. So sometimes people will bring something in to photograph their work on top of, like a piece of white mat board or a piece of black mat board, something like that. Sometimes that's useful. I actually came in here and photographed a small book that I had made recently, and for that I did use a white piece of mat board to be a background. In this case, I'm photographing as if I were photographing a painting or a drawing, or another two-dimensional work that's going to be framed by itself. It's not a three-dimensional object. So I will crop the final image to just that image, just the artwork. I want to fill as much of my frame as possible with just the artwork so that I don't have to crop very much out, and I have the highest resolution possible. But then I don't have to worry very much about my background either. So to focus you half press this silver button, which is the shutter release, which will take the photograph. So you half press that and it'll make a little beep beep noise, and that's it focusing. And then you press it all the way to make a photograph. So, right now I've got it, the focal length set at something like maybe 40 or 37 or something millimeters. So that's not too bad in terms of distortion. The more wide your angle is, the more distorted it will be. So in general, this isn't great for photographing artwork that is very large. So this setup, with this lens works pretty well up to about 18 by 24. I would say that is about the maximum that you can photograph with this setup. After that, you really need to get further away. So we also have a setup for photographing three-dimensional work in this room, in the same room with the copy stand. And that consists of 2 lights, same as the other ones, also fluorescent lights with kind of a diffusion panel in front of them to make them a little bit softer. And then also this little white tent, which provides kind of a very small portable backdrop that is white in this case, but it is also a big light diffuser. So this is what they call a light tent. The lights are set up on either side of it, and so the light comes through the tent and becomes that much softer and also that much bigger, because now the whole tent is like the source of light. This is particularly useful for photographing reflective subjects, but it's also just nice to have kind of like a little backdrop that's really easy to use. For photographing larger three-dimensional work, you would need to talk to me about photographing in the lighting studio or setting up a different backdrop in here and just getting a setup that's going to work for the piece that you need to photograph. So to show you today, we've got, similar to the copy stand, we have these 2 lights. They are the same light, so they are equal brightness. They are at the same height and at the same distance, because that also affects the brightness. So for this little cup, this is plenty big enough. And I've got the lights as low as they will go. If I were photographing something taller, I try to have the light sort of centered on how high the subject is. I thought, for the sake of the demo at least, I would go ahead and just use the same camera from the copy stand. So just bring that over here. It's going to be useful to have a tripod so that you can keep a low ISO, which gives you a higher quality image that is not grainy. You could also use this lighting setup with a different camera, even your phone. If you have a new phone and it takes really high quality images, there's no reason that you couldn't use this light setup and actually take photographs using that. So those are all possibilities. So I'm going to set this on a tripod, also because it makes it easier to do the demo. And I thought I might as well show you a tripod. You could check out a tripod from me, even if you are not in a photo class. You can check out a tripod as long as you bring it back, right? With all of its pieces, particularly the plate, which people always forget and leave attached to the camera. So this kind of plate, pretty much every kind of plate, screws on to the bottom of the camera, just like the screw did for the copy stand, except in this case, the plate comes off. All right, so I tighten that on there, and then it goes back into the tripod. And then this one has a screw that just tightens and holds it there. So a tripod is useful whenever you're going to need a slower shutter speed than you can hold steady. So in a lighting situation like this, if I want to use a low ISO, I need to have a relatively slow shutter speed. And then just my movement of being a living, breathing human being can make that photograph unsharp. So I'll go ahead and use a tripod. As I mentioned before, this one has one of those screens that pops out. Right, so I can put it on here, turn it on, and get my image framed about the way that I would want it. All right, when you check out a tripod, if you check out a tripod, I, or whoever checks the tripod out to you, would give you a quick demonstration of how it works, rather than, they're not all the same. And we don't have all the same tripod even that we check out. So it's useful to have just a quick demonstration of how that tripod works. All right, this is a ball head. So I'm filling my frame. To make a good photograph, I'm going to fill my frame with the subject rather than having, a bunch of empty space. I'm going to get, my whole subject in the frame. And again, I'm going for what is called descriptive lighting, which would be kind of soft, flat, even lighting over the whole subject without any harsh shadows. And that's what this big, wraparound light source is going to help me achieve. So once again, just like we did on the copy stand, we half press that shutter button to autofocus, and then we can take the photograph, and it will display. So here, this is a little bit dark, I would say. So I'm going to brighten it up by slowing down my shutter speed. I changed my aperture as well, and this is all, again, this is getting manual on you and technical on you, but to increase my depth of field so that the whole cup would be sharp rather than just the surface. I made my aperture a larger number, which lets in less light, but increases your depth of field. All right, I think I could go even a little bit brighter here. Right, so again, slowing down that shutter speed. Okay, so now I have an image that I'm pretty happy with. If I were to turn it to manual, it would change its settings and do kind of its own thing. And again, look a little bit dark in this case. And the reason that it looks a little bit dark is because the camera expects your frame to average out to a middle gray. And when you have a lot of white background, it's not going to average out to middle gray. It is a scene that is brighter than average. So that kind of throws off your exposure a little bit if you're using auto or when you're looking at your meter. So, those are valuable things to know. Nothing that we can't handle when it comes to editing, and I will show you guys a little bit of editing as well. The next thing that you